The Willow and Hearth Cafe wasn't fancy, but its soft terracotta walls, exposed brick, and freshly brewed cinnamon roast made it feel like the kind of place where stories began. Rowan Hale had never been the type to chase stories, only responsibilities. A single father for the last 3 years, he lived by schedules: school drop-offs, therapy sessions, work hours, homework, dinner, bedtime. Today, however, his best friend Hollies had convinced him to disrupt that sacred order. "It's just coffee," Hollies had said. "1 hour, she's not a setup, she's a possibility." Rowan wasn't convinced. But here he was, 15 minutes early, sitting at a window table, obsessively checking his watch and overthinking whether his shirt made him look approachable or exhausted, or both. He didn't know her name. Hollies had only said, "You'll understand when you meet her." The cafe bell chimed. A woman rolled in through the doorway on a sleek white wheelchair, her curly brown hair tucked behind pale blue hearing aids. She paused just inside, scanning the room not for a seat but for judgment. Her gaze landed on Rowan. A flicker of pain flashed in her eyes. She froze. Rowan stood slowly, lifting a hand in greeting, but she didn't move. Instead, her face crumpled, tears welling before she could hide them. He approached carefully, speaking softly but also signing, clumsy but sincere. "Hi, I'm Rowan." Her eyes widened, not with relief, but something complicated. She signed shakily. "Did he tell you everything? Did Hollies warn you?" He hesitated. "He just said you were someone worth meeting." Her laugh was bitter and messy. "Of course he did." More tears. People were starting to notice. She didn't care. She signed faster, words tumbling like a dam breaking. "You can go. Please leave. I can't do this again. I thought this time would be different. I thought someone like me would show up, not someone normal." The word normal sliced through Rowan more than it should have. She tried to turn her chair around, but he gently stepped into her line of sight, signing slowly, honestly, "You're right. Hollies didn't tell us everything, but I'm not here for pity. And I'm not leaving unless you ask me after I've had the chance to know you." She stared at him, crying openly now, confusion replacing panic. "Why would you stay when you could walk away?" He took a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Because I know what it's like when people think they're helping, but they're really just fixing. I know what it feels like to be labeled broken. I have been someone people try to repair. Something shifted, not trust, not comfort, but maybe recognition." She wiped her face, cheeks flushed. "My name is Leora," she said softly, spoken words imperfect but brave. Rowan smiled, both spoken and signed. "I'm glad you came, Leora. Can we start there?" She didn't answer with words. She nodded. What happens when two people who stopped believing in second chances accidentally walk into one? Leora hovered at the edge of the cafe floor like she was standing at a cliff. Except cliffs didn't have quiet jazz, warm lighting, and bakers smiling behind pastry counters. Rowan didn't guide her or hover. He simply walked beside her, matching pace without making it obvious. No rescuing, no pushing, just presence. He sat across from her, offering a gentle smile. "Coffee or tea?" he asked aloud, but also signed at the same time, hands graceful but slightly hesitant. She noticed his hands more than his words. He actually learned to sign, she thought, not for her but before her. That mattered. "Chamomile," she said quietly, speaking and signing together. As he ordered, she watched him. He didn't rush. He didn't stare at her chair. He didn't overcompensate with exaggerated courtesy. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, attentive and calm, not because she needed help, but because she mattered. When he came back, he didn't sit immediately. Instead, he signed gently, "May I sit?" Something inside her softened. She nodded. Silence settled, but not the uncomfortable kind. It was more like pause, like the story hadn't decided what to become yet. Finally, she signed, "I thought Hollies was setting me up with someone like me." Rowan nodded slowly. "He told me the same thing," he signed. "He said you'd be someone who understood." Leora let out a shaky breath. Understood what? His hands moved slowly, thoughtfully. That being strong doesn't mean being untouched. That survival isn't always visible. Leora blinked, stunned. She'd never seen strength described quite like that. Rowan paused, then added, spoken softly, signs smaller, more vulnerable. He said you don't need rescuing. You just need someone to stop assuming you do. Her throat tightened, not with pain this time, but recognition. How long had it been since someone understood that difference? She took a deep breath, then surprised herself by speaking aloud, raw, unfiltered. Everyone says I'm strong, but they say it like I didn't have a choice. Rowan nodded. Strength isn't a choice, he said gently. It's what's left when choices disappear. There it was, not pity, not awe, understanding. She looked at him more closely, not at his neatly pressed shirt or nervous posture, but at the quiet heaviness behind his eyes, and something clicked. He knows loss too, she thought. He didn't say it, but she knew. Sometimes grief recognized grief even before words did. She tapped lightly on the table, gaining his attention. Why did you show up? She signed, knowing nothing about me. He took a moment before answering, hands still. Then he signed slowly. Because someone once stayed for me when I was at my worst, and it changed everything. Her eyes locked on his. Something fragile, almost sacred, passed between them. Not romance, not fate, something quieter, possibility. Leora let her hands rest on the table, not signing, not hiding, just being. For the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Just as she begins to trust him, he reveals the truth about his past and why he nearly didn't show up at all. For a while, they simply drank their tea and coffee in a silence that didn't feel empty, more like it was making room for something. Outside, rain started tapping against the cafe window, soft and steady, like it was waiting too. Finally, Rowan spoke, not rushed, not forced, just honest. I almost didn't come today. Leora looked up, her hands pausing mid-stir. No surprise flashed across her face, just quiet curiosity. He continued, speaking and signing at once, not perfectly but sincerely. For 3 years, I've been the guy who shows up for everybody. My daughter, my patients, my mother, but not for myself. Not once. Leora watched him closely, not intruding, just present. He took a slow breath. I lost my wife to cancer, he signed gently, spoken words cracking slightly. I watched her fight for 1.5 years. And when she was gone, people didn't know what to do with me anymore. They treated me like a wounded project. They kept trying to fix me, to pair me off, like grief was a broken appliance that just needed replacing. Leora's chest tightened. He wasn't telling a sad story. He was sharing a real one. He signed slower now, as if each word weighed something. I didn't need fixing. I needed someone to stop trying to fix me. He looked directly at her, not at the chair, not at the hearing aids, at her. That's why I didn't walk away when you asked me to, he signed gently. Leora's fingers trembled slightly. No one had ever said that to her, not without pity, not without conditions, just truth. She took a breath, then signed quietly. People see the wheelchair. They see the hearing aids. They assume broken first. Rowan nodded. People see widowed dad. They assume fragile first. She gave the faintest hint of a smile, and both are wrong. He smiled back, small, real, very wrong. Raindrops slid slowly down the window beside them, blurring the view of the busy street outside. Somewhere behind the counter, utensils clinked. A soft laugh drifted across the tables. Life went on quietly, just as it was supposed to. Leora finally spoke softly, openly. I have been on dates before, she said, words imperfect but unfiltered. And every time people either tried too hard or not at all. They either pitied me or ignored everything about me that made me me. Rowan nodded. Maybe that's the problem. People assume understanding is the same as agreeing or fixing or rescuing. Leora looked at him thoughtfully. So what is it then? He smiled gently, signing clearly. Understanding is staying, not saving, not solving, staying. Something warm settled inside her, not sudden, not dramatic, but steady. She gently placed her hand on the table, open, not guarded. And for once, she didn't feel like she needed to leave before someone else did. She didn't feel like a warning or a test or an exception. She just felt seen. For who she was, not what happened to her. After a long moment, she signed slowly, "I'm scared to trust this." Rowan nodded, unbothered. "Me too." She blinked, surprised. "You are?" "Yes," he signed, "because caring always comes with risk." She looked down at their tea cups, then back at him, and signed, "Maybe risk isn't always danger. Sometimes it's possibility." This time, Rowan didn't just nod, he smiled. What happens when he invites her to rewrite their beginning, not as a setup, but as two people choosing to stay? The air in the cafe felt different now, not lighter, not heavier, but somehow truer. It was no longer a place they were forced into by someone else's plan. It was now the place where they chose to stay. Leora took another sip of her tea. Her hands no longer trembled, and her shoulders had slowly lowered from their defensive posture. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't preparing herself for disappointment. Rowan noticed, not with celebration, but with quiet respect. He wasn't trying to win her over, he was trying to show up, and that mattered. He set aside his coffee cup and signed slowly, thoughtfully. "I don't want our beginning to be a misunderstanding or a pity setup." He paused. "What if we start over, not as a blind date, not as Holly's plan, but as two people choosing to meet on purpose?" He reached out a little, not touching, but close enough to say, "I'm here." "Hi, I'm Rowan Hale," he signed slowly, "and I'd like to meet you." Something bright flickered in her eyes, not big, not sudden, but new. She smiled, small, hesitant, but real. "Hi, I'm Leora," she signed, then surprised herself by speaking the words too. "And I'd like to be met." They didn't rush. They didn't dive into the heavy things again. Instead, they talked about ordinary, beautifully normal things. She told him about her work as a freelance illustrator, how she designed book covers and children's graphics from her apartment studio that overlooked the river. She admitted, hesitantly, that art had saved her when her life suddenly changed, giving her something she could still do, even when everything she thought she was had been shaken. He told her about physical therapy, not the medical routines, but the moments when a person believed, for the first time, that life after pain could still hold joy. How recovery wasn't just about muscles, it was about hope. She looked at him differently then, not as a widowed father, not as a man trying to be kind, but as someone who understood what it meant to rebuild, even when nothing looked like before. At one point she paused, then signed slowly. "Do you ever feel like your life divided into before and after?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he nodded. "Yes, but I'm learning that after doesn't have to mean lesser, just different." Leora held his gaze, she understood, more deeply than words or signs could express. Because for years she had believed after meant everything beautiful was gone. But maybe beautiful just looked different now. Rowan sensed her thoughts and gently signed one more thing. The hardest thing about after is believing joy is still allowed. She felt that. More deeply than anything he'd said so far. They didn't speak after that, not right away. They let the moment just be. A gentle, unforced pause. Like breath, like space, like something beginning. And for the first time in a long time, Leora didn't feel like she needed to protect herself. She didn't feel small, she didn't feel broken. She felt possible. What happens when Rowan invites her to see where possibility began? For both of them. 2 days later, Rowan sent Leora a message, not a long one, not heavy or emotional, just 5 words. Would you like some air? He didn't explain more. He didn't need to. Leora stared at the message for a full minute before replying. You mean outside air? He sent back a small smile emoji and, I'll pick you up at 4. She hesitated. She liked control. She liked knowing what to expect. Surprise often meant disappointment. But something about the gentleness of the idea, just air, felt safe. At 4, he arrived, not in a rush, not waiting impatiently, but simply present. He adjusted nothing, made no fuss about loading her wheelchair into his car. He didn't insist on helping, but he didn't disappear either. He simply moved with her. That mattered. After a quiet drive, he pulled into a parking space beside a wide, paved path lined with trees. It wasn't a park. It wasn't a tourist spot. It was a rehabilitation center. Her heart stumbled. Not this place. Cedar Crest Rehabilitation Facility. She knew it from the outside. She had passed it years ago, but never dared go inside. Not after what she went through at her own rehab clinic across town. She looked at him unsure. He didn't push. He only signed slowly. This is where I learned to help others rebuild, not just bodies, lives. It's where I began to understand healing isn't always about fixing. She didn't respond, not yet. He continued, hands steady. I wanted to show you, not because I think your story needs repairing, but because this place is where mine began to change. That was different. This wasn't about her. It was about him finally choosing to share more than the surface. She nodded once, and he gently opened the building's side entrance. Automated doors wide enough for wheelchairs, ramps smooth and unobstructed. Thought-out accessibility, she noted absent-mindedly. Not the kind that exists just to meet regulations, but the kind that comes from people who actually understand. Inside, the building smelled like eucalyptus and clean fabric, not sterile, not clinical. Warm, intentional. Rowan led her down a quiet hallway, not speaking, not explaining too much. Just walking beside her, matching pace without making it obvious. He paused at a doorway. Inside, sunlight pooled across polished wood floors and parallel bars, the kind used to help patients learn to walk again. But these bars weren't empty. Small paper cranes hung above them, hundreds of them, floating gently from the ceiling like little pieces of hope. Leora stared, breath caught somewhere behind her ribs. Rowan signed softly. Every time someone takes their first step here, they hang a crane. Leora looked closer. Some cranes were wrinkled, some painted, some carefully folded by shaky hands. None were perfect. All were beautiful. She didn't speak. She didn't sign, she just felt. He waited, quietly letting her absorb it. Finally, she turned to him. You brought me here to show me hope isn't always loud. He nodded. Sometimes it hangs quietly from a ceiling, crooked but still flying. This time her smile wasn't cautious. It was real, gentle, and free. When he shows her where his healing began, she finally decides to tell him where hers nearly ended. For a while, they simply stood in the therapy room, Leora's eyes tracing the rows of delicate paper cranes, Rowan quietly beside her. The air felt softer here, not like a hospital, but like a place where hope wasn't forced. It was patiently grown. She finally turned to him. "You showed me where your healing began," she signed slowly. "I think I'm ready to show you where mine almost ended." Her heart thudded. She hadn't planned to say that, not today, not yet. But something about this place, the quiet, the honesty, made it feel possible. Rowan didn't respond right away. He didn't ask. He just nodded gently, the kind of nod that meant take your time. She wheeled herself closer to the window where the sun touched the floor like a spotlight. She paused, then began signing, not dramatically, not rehearsed. Just true. 5 years ago, I wasn't in this facility. I was across the river at Crestwood Recovery Center. Different building, similar purpose, except I didn't believe recovery was meant for me. Rowan watched fully, attentively, not staring, seeing. She continued. I was 26. I had a fiancé, a job I loved, a body I trusted. Then one step back on a slippery trail and everything changed. She didn't describe the fall in detail. She didn't need to. I woke up to mobility gone, hearing fading. Future blurred, and when my hearing fully left, so did my fiancée. Her hands paused midair, not because she forgot the signs, but because this part had never been signed to anyone before. Rowan waited. She went on. He said he loved me, but not like this. Not with wheels, not with silence. She laughed once, shaky, not bitter this time, just tired. He said he felt trapped. Rowan felt something ache deep in his chest, but he didn't interrupt. Not once. That's when I realized losing something isn't the hardest part. Being seen as less because of it, that's worse. She blinked slowly, steadying herself. People didn't look at me anymore. They looked at what wasn't working. My legs. My ears, my old life gone. She looked around the therapy room, the bars, the cranes, the soft echoes of resilience. Rehab wasn't where I healed. It was where I decided healing might never happen for me. Her hands hovered mid-sign, unsure. Then one more truth emerged. The hardest moment wasn't the fall, or the hospital, or the silence. She looked directly at Rowan now. The hardest moment was realizing that I didn't see myself anymore. That confession sat there, quiet, raw, sacred. She took a shaky breath. Then signed, I stopped wanting someone to stay. I stopped believing anyone ever would. Her hands fell to her lap. Silence, but not empty. A different kind of silence. A silence that didn't isolate. A silence that held. Rowan finally moved, not with words or pity or rushing comfort. He simply sat on the floor beside her wheelchair, not lower, not higher. Equal. And signed, you didn't stop being whole. You just stopped being seen that way, but wholeness has never been a visible thing. The words landed like warm sunlight, quiet but certain. Leora didn't cry, not this time. There was something new in her eyes, not hope yet, but the invitation to it. When he brings her to meet the one person who helped him rebuild, she realizes healing might be contagious. A week later, Rowan sent another message. Would you be open to meeting someone who saw me when I stopped seeing myself? Leora stared at the text. Not a date, not a surprise, a meeting, something intentional. She thought of that therapy room, the paper cranes, the quiet kind of hope. Then she typed back, "As long as it isn't Holly's." He responded with a laughing emoji and, "Even better." That Saturday, Rowan picked her up again, making no fuss of the wheelchair, no exaggerated politeness. Just calm, respectful, present. They drove through a quiet neighborhood, past rows of dogwood trees in soft pink bloom. He parked outside a light blue cottage with hanging wind chimes that twinkled faintly in the breeze. Leora noticed something immediately. The door knocker was low, wheelchair height. The porch ramp wasn't temporary or foldable. It was built with the house. Intentional. "Where are we?" she asked softly. Rowan smiled, signing and speaking at once. "Where I learned to hope again, and where someone made sure I didn't forget how to." The door opened. A woman in her late 60s stood there, silver hair in a loose braid, soft gray sweater, eyes bright with warmth. Leora noticed something else. Her hearing aids, barely visible but unmistakable. She signed fluidly, "You must be Leora, I'm Maeve. I've been waiting to meet you, not looking forward to it, not nice to meet you. Waiting to meet you." The difference mattered. Inside, the home was filled with small signs of lived accessibility. Wide hallways, hearing assist phone with captions, lamps that flashed when the doorbell rang. But none felt clinical. It felt like belonging, not adaptation. Maeve made tea not the hurried kind, but the kind people stay for. She didn't ask about Leora's injury. She didn't ask about her hearing. She asked about her art. And when Leora talked, she didn't nod politely. She leaned in curious, engaged, asking more. Half an hour passed like 5 minutes. At one point, Maeve turned to Rowan with a knowing smile. "You used to sit at that exact spot," she signed to him, pointing to the kitchen table. Silent. Tired, not from being a father, from being afraid to be anything else. Rowan smiled. He'd heard this before, but it still mattered. Then Maeve looked at Leora. "Grief is not just for the people we lose," she signed softly. "Sometimes it's for the versions of ourselves we don't get to be anymore." Leora felt that, deeply. Maeve continued, "But those versions aren't dead. They evolve. You didn't lose who you were, you became someone new." Leora swallowed hard. Not because it hurt, because it felt true. Maeve smiled gently. "Healing is not a finish line. Sometimes it's simply being willing to let joy in wherever it can fit." Leora didn't respond right away, but her hands moved slowly. "It's been a long time since joy fit anywhere." Maeve nodded and smiled. "Then maybe it doesn't need to fit. Maybe it needs to spill." That's when Rowan quietly placed something on the table. A small paper crane, just one, slightly crooked. Handmade, not perfect, but unmistakably hopeful. Leora reached out, and instead of flinching from it, she held it. Not tightly, just held. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel fixed. She felt seen. She finally invites him into her world, and discovers he had already built space for her there. Sometimes change doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it begins quietly with a small paper crane resting in your palm. For Leora, things didn't transform overnight, but something had undeniably shifted. She found herself looking forward to messages, to conversations not centered on pain or pity or caution, but on possibility, humor, and moments that felt startlingly normal. One afternoon, she sent Rowan a message that felt bigger than it appeared. "Would you like to see my studio?" His reply came so quickly it made her smile. "I've been waiting for you to ask." Her studio wasn't fancy. It wasn't the kind of artistic workspace that made it onto Pinterest boards or decor magazines. It was a small corner of her apartment by the biggest window overlooking the river. But it was hers. Her brushes, her sketch tablet, her pinned-up concepts, her scattered drafts. Her story illustrated. When Rowan stepped inside, he didn't comment on the wheelchair ramps or the adaptive desk height or the voice-to-text monitor. He noticed the art first. He looked at the light reflecting off tubes of paint. He looked at the drawings pinned to the wall, colorful, alive, full of movement. He looked at her. "You draw motion," he said quietly. She blinked, caught off guard. "What? You draw motion?" he repeated, stepping closer to one sketch. A girl in a wheelchair laughing, hair flying, wheels blurred like a spinning comet. "Even when you draw stillness, it feels like it's about to move." No one had ever said that to her. Most people saw her art and said it was inspiring. He didn't. He called it alive. That made all the difference. She hesitated for a long moment, then opened a drawer at the side of her desk. Inside were her other drawings. Not ones for clients, ones that never left this room, ones that held feelings, not assignments. There were drawings of silence, dark, soft, and strangely peaceful. Drawings of grief, quiet, heavy, never violent. Drawings that showed memory, not in detail, but in impression. And one drawing of herself, not broken, not shattered, just rebuilding. Rowan didn't praise them. He didn't call them strong. He just looked at them for a long time. Then quietly said, "I don't think healing always looks like getting better. Sometimes it looks like getting real." She didn't respond, but she gently set the paper crane from Maeve on her desk, and next to it something unexpected. One she had folded herself. A second crane. For the first time she had added one, not perfect, but hers. Rowan noticed. He smiled, but didn't say anything. Some things don't need words, not spoken, not even signed. Some things simply need to be shared. She looked at him, really looked. Not for signs he might leave, but for signs he intended to stay. And what she saw, presence, not performative, not temporary, just present, fully. She signed slowly, almost shyly. "I don't need you to understand everything. Just don't assume anything, especially what I can or cannot do. Let me show you." Rowan nodded, warm, steady. "I don't want to assume, I want to learn." Then something unexpected happened. She leaned forward and handed him a sketchbook. Empty, possibility. "Maybe," she said softly, "we don't just talk about rebuilding. Maybe," she placed the pencil beside it, "we draw it." He invites her somewhere she once avoided, and this time she doesn't face it alone. Healing isn't always about finding new places. Sometimes it's about returning to old ones without fear, without being alone. One rainy morning, Rowan messaged her. "Are you free this afternoon? There's somewhere I'd like us to go." She hesitated. She typed. "Will it be hard?" He replied after a pause. "Maybe, but not heavy and not alone." She stared at the blinking cursor for almost a full minute, then typed just one word. "Okay." They drove quietly, soft rain streaking the windows. Leora watched the city blur past, the bookstores, the bridges, the food carts. She didn't ask where they were going. Something in her trusted that it wouldn't be a place that hurt. When the car finally stopped, she saw it. She froze. The Portland Riverside Trail, the place she used to hike every spring. The place with cliffs, winding paths, and one section with a steep overlook. She hadn't been back here since before the accident. She swallowed throat tight, but Rowan didn't rush, didn't push. He only said softly, "Not that trail. Not today." He wheeled out her chair from the trunk, unfolded it, and paused before looking at her. "There are paths here," he said gently, "that weren't possible before." She looked at him, then at the paved trail beside them. It wasn't steep, it wasn't dangerous. It wasn't what she had lost, it was simply new. Slowly she nodded. The rain eased into a mist, gentle and silver against the trees. They started forward. Her wheels moved smoothly along the wet pavement. Birds chattered in the branches, and the smell of pine and damp earth wrapped around them like memory, but not a painful one, a changing one. They reached a wide overlook, fully accessible, with smooth railing, benches, and a view of the river that looked like it had been waiting for her to come back. She didn't speak at first. She just looked at the same river that had once existed in her before life. But this time, it didn't feel like something she had lost. It felt like something that was still hers, just different. When she finally turned to Rowan, her voice was soft but sure. "I used to think healing meant getting back what I once had." He nodded, but didn't interrupt. She looked out at the river again. "But maybe healing means learning to love what's still here." A single moment of silence followed. Not empty, not hesitant, just right. She turned to him again, signing slowly, "This place used to remind me of who I was. Now it reminds me of who I still am." Rowan exhaled softly. He didn't smile right away. Instead, he signed something she hadn't expected. Healing isn't returning. It's arriving. Her hands moved before she could stop them. "I never thought I'd arrive anywhere new. I thought all I had left was what used to be." He shook his head gently. "There's still what can be." She looked back at the water, calm, moving, alive, like her. For the first time, she didn't picture falling. She pictured choosing. She looked at Rowan, then held out her hand, not shaking. Not fragile, steady. He didn't take it right away. He looked at it, respected it. Then held it, not to lead, not to guide, simply to stay. Now that she has allowed him into her past, what happens when he welcomes her into his future? Some invitations change everything. They don't always sound grand, poetic, or life-altering. Sometimes they arrive simply as, "Would you like to come for dinner? Amelia wants to show you something." Leora stared at the message. She knew what it meant. This wasn't a casual dinner. It wasn't just a visit. It was a door, not into his past, not into his pain, but into his future. She sat with that thought for a while, not with fear, with awe. Then she slowly typed back. Yes, Rowan lived in a quiet neighborhood, not perfect, not fancy, but full of life. Chalk drawings on sidewalks, children's bikes on porches, wind chimes singing gently in the cold air. He opened the door, not rushing, not waiting on the porch, just smiling as if her timing was always right. Amelia practically barreled down the hallway, socks sliding on wooden floors. Her curls bounced, eyes shining. She stopped in front of Leora, breathless, signing with dramatic flair. "I made something. It's very important." She led them to the living room. On the table sat a paper crane, not perfectly folded, a little wrinkled but carefully made. And beside it another, and another, and another. 15 cranes in different sizes and colors, some lopsided, some painted, some with little doodles all over them. Leora stared, then looked at Rowan, then back at Amelia. The little girl signed, hands expressive and full of joy. "These are my cranes. Dad said one is for every hard thing we get through. He said yours is special because you didn't just get through, you grew through. Leora felt something catch in her chest. Not like before, not heavy, not sharp, just full. She couldn't speak. But her hands could. Did you teach her this? She signed to Rowan. He shook his head. No, he said softly, voice gentler than she had ever heard. She watched and learned. Leora turned back to Amelia, who grinned proudly and thrust a blank sheet of paper at her. You have to fold one, the little girl signed seriously. We're making a flock. Leora folded one, not perfect, not neat, but real. Then she placed it beside the others, not apart from them, with them. She didn't realize when tears began to fall, not sad, not overwhelmed, just grateful. Rowan knelt beside her, not touching her, just near. He signed slowly. I didn't want to rush this. I didn't want to call it something before it had time to become something. But I want you to know his hands trembled, then stilled. You are not an exception in this house. You are not a guest. You are welcome. Leora looked around, at the cranes, at the little girl who now believed healing could be folded into tiny paper wings, at the man who hadn't tried to fix her but had simply stayed. She signed, quiet, certain, and unguarded. I didn't think after could be beautiful, but this feels like beginning. Rowan exhaled, not a shaky exhale, a relieved one. The kind people breathe when something finally makes sense. He didn't say, I love you. He didn't have to because the cranes said it. The invitation said it. The welcome said it. Love wasn't the big moment. Love was the sum of all the small ones. She finally leaned forward, and instead of offering a warning, she offered her hand. Not out of fear, but out of choice. He didn't take it right away because he wasn't rescuing her. He took it when she looked directly at him as an equal, as a partner, as someone who could build something beautiful out of everything imperfect. And when their hands finally met, it didn't feel like rescue. It felt like arrival. But love doesn't just arrive, it grows. So what happens when possibility becomes promise, and promise becomes home? Some moments don't announce themselves with fireworks. Some arrive in the quiet, through laughter, mismatched socks, burnt pancakes, and the familiar creak of a doorway that suddenly feels like home. Weeks passed, and what began as caution slowly shaped into rhythm. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Leora began spending time at Rowan's house, not as a visitor, but as someone with a mug permanently in the cabinet. Someone whose sketchbook rested on the coffee table. Someone who helped Amelia hang paper cranes in places they didn't even belong, on curtain rods, doorknobs, and, somehow, even inside the refrigerator. One evening, Rowan found her in the kitchen, baking, laughing, utterly unaware of how happy she looked. She had music softly playing, not for herself, but for the house. She couldn't hear it, but she saw it. The rhythm in the way Amelia danced while stirring batter. The way Rowan tapped his foot unconsciously. The way life moved around her without passing her by. She smiled, not because she remembered happiness, but because she was living it. Amelia ran in with a burst of energy. "It's ready," she signed dramatically, pointing to a wrapped box on the table. "What's this?" Leora signed, confused. Rowan came in quietly, smiling. "Not from me," he signed. "From her." Amelia tugged at Leora's sleeve. "Open it." Inside the box lay a small journal, hand-decorated. On the cover, crooked letters spelled, not broken, just building. Leora gently traced the words. She looked at Amelia, then at Rowan, then back at the journal. Inside, on the very first page, in a mix of big, shaky letters and imperfect doodles, Amelia had written, "Families aren't always made. Sometimes they're noticed." Leora froze, her vision blurred. Not from sorrow this time, from a fullness she didn't know how to hold. She turned to Rowan, but before she could speak, he knelt beside her wheelchair, not lower than her, not above her, but level. Always level. He didn't pull out a ring, he didn't give a speech. He simply signed, "I don't want to ask you to change anything about who you are. I just want to ask, can I build beside you?" He paused, then added, "For as long as we're allowed to stay." Tears slid down her cheeks, not painful, not desperate, just true. She reached out, not shaking, not afraid, and signed, "Yes, but not because I need you, because I choose you, even on the days I don't feel brave." Rowan smiled, his hands gentle but sure. "That's how I know it's real." He didn't kiss her right away. He waited. She looked at him, and this time she leaned in first. There was no dramatic music, no cinematic moment, just warmth, presence, and a quiet, unwavering promise. "I will not ask you to be anyone but yourself." They didn't call it engagement, not yet. They called it agreement, to stay, to build, to belong. Because love doesn't end with a promise. It begins with choosing every day to stay. Months later, there was no grand wedding yet. No big announcements. No formal labels, just small confirmations. Like a second toothbrush gently added to the bathroom counter. Like 3 mugs instead of 2 on Saturday mornings. Like a paper crane hung on the front door with 3 names signed at the bottom. Not decorative, declarative. A home wasn't made the day they signed paperwork. It was made the day they all stopped knocking before entering. One evening, as spring light poured into the living room, Rowan sat cross-legged on the floor while Amelia drew on scrap paper nearby. Leora sat at the table, sketching, not for work, not for recovery, but because she could. She no longer only drew what had been lost. She didn't only draw motion, she drew belonging. Soft, real, imperfect belonging. She looked around the house, the scattered cranes, the children's drawings taped beside her own, the wheelchair-accessible furniture that didn't look medical, it looked intentional. Chosen, designed to support life, not accommodate limitation. She ran her hand along the journal cover, not broken, just building. She turned the page. On the next blank sheet, she began to draw, not her past, not her pain, but her present. There were 3 figures not perfectly drawn, one with curly hair dancing, one sketching, wheels drawn like wings, and one with gentle eyes looking not at the wheelchair, but at her. Underneath, she wrote, "Home doesn't always look like you imagined. Sometimes it looks even better." Just then, Rowan walked in carrying a frame. He held it up. Inside was one of her paper cranes, snapped at the center, crinkled, a little damaged, but repaired. Taped carefully, not hidden. Displayed. "Wholeness is not the absence of cracks," it read. "It's the choice to keep flying anyway." Leora didn't cry this time. She smiled. She looked at Rowan not for assurance, but for affirmation. She signed slowly, steady. "I am not afraid of after anymore." He smiled. "Because you arrived." She looked around, not at perfection, but at life, messy, beautiful, loud, and quiet all at once. She signed one last truth. "I thought my story ended the day everything changed. Now I know that's when it began." Rowan placed the taped crane next to the others, 15 of them now, folded by 3 different hands, representing 3 different journeys. He signed. Paper can tear, people can too, but both can be rebuilt, sometimes stronger, sometimes softer, always meaningful. She looked at the cranes, at Rowan, at Amelia, now asleep on the rug, crayons scattered around her like petals, and whispered with her voice and her hands, "Welcome home." Love doesn't always arrive to rescue you. Sometimes it arrives to rebuild with you.